Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Luciano Floridi. He is the OII's Professor of Philosophy and Ethics of Information at the University of Oxford, where he is also the Director of the Digital Ethics Lab of the Oxford Internet Institute and Professorial Fellow of Exeter College. He is a Turing Fellow of the Alan Turing Institute and Chair of its Data Ethics Group. His research concerns primarily digital ethics, that is, information and computer ethics, and the philosophy of information and the philosophy of technology. His other research interests include epistemology, philosophy of logic, and the history and philosophy of Scepticism. So, Dr. Floridi, thank you a lot for taking the time to come on the show. It's a real honor to everyone.
Thank you for having me over. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, I invited you on the show basically to talk about some broad topics on the philosophy of information, because would you say that philosophy of information is a recent branch of philosophy, or do you think that we could trace it back, I don't know, some centuries or millennia or something like that?
Yes, so I think we can take two views here. One is the actual field, the label. It is very recent. I'm happy to say that I try to establish it as a branch of philosophy, and to make sure that we, as philosophers, but not only philosophers, concentrate on issues that are related to information in a sort of more focused, conceptually rigorous way, scientifically informed way. So the philosophy of information is something that I'm proudly sort of presenting as an area of inquiry that could be compared to the philosophy of mind, the philosophy of language, and so on. So that's a new enterprise. At the same time, as we know, there's hardly ever anything very new in philosophy. And so if we want to look at the philosophy of information as something that philosophers have also been interested in the past, although not under that label, maybe not with the same focus, well, we can go all the way back to Plato, really. When Plato, for example, is talking about the theory of forms, or when Aristotle is talking about the problems in logic or in his aesthetics, you can reinterpret some of the things that even Greek philosophers have been discussing in informational terms. So in a way, it would be like saying, look, information has always done a lot of work in philosophy. It's just that, as I said in the past, it was more like the Cinderella in the kitchen. We didn't see her, and it is time for us to pay due respect to such a fundamental topic, and therefore such a fundamental branch of philosophy. Hence my attempt to make it part of the general approach to philosophical issues. The last point, if I may, is that, of course, anyone today that the label, the concept, the field is available, can do philosophy of information one way or another. My personal way of doing philosophy of information may be very different from someone else's way, but that's a different story. It's like saying, now that we have the philosophy of language, my philosophy of language is different from yours, so my philosophy of mind is different from yours. That is normal, and that's what happens in a good environment.
Mm-hmm. Right. And about information, what does it mean exactly? Because I would imagine that since Plato and other ancient philosophers that there was some reconceptualization, right? Because information doesn't mean nowadays for us, particularly with modern physics and neuroscience, probably what it meant back then for the Greeks and others, correct?
Yes, no, you're right. And I think here a few distinctions are crucial. The distinction between, first of all, information and data, and then the distinction between syntax and semantics, And then there's further distinction between what we mean by information. So if we start from data versus information, normally the data are considered to be the ingredients that we put together in order to get information. For example, a bunch of points on a Cartesian diagram, on Cartesian axis, they could be meaning a lot of different things. Those are what we call data points, but the information we extract from that, that's a completely different story. Of course, as I said, the ingredients are there. We prepare, we massage, we interpret them in a particular way, and we extract information. Once we have data as something that we use in order to generate information, so information is data, then we need to put the data in a particular structure. That's syntax. How the data are not randomly generated, but they have particular sort of recurrent patterns, for example, or a particular trajectory. It might be that that is a curve that is going up or down, is increasing or decreasing, etc. That syntax is also fundamental. So information as data plus structure, syntax, but then we have to give it some meaning. What does it mean to us as opposed to someone else? So you might have all the data in the world put together in a particular picture, and then someone can see that as just a piece of cloth. For someone else, that is a flag. So my meaning is different from yours. My interpretation might be slightly different from yours. So data put together with a syntax and then interpreted, that is already some kind of what we normally mean by information. At that point, we need to distinguish between information in the strong factual semantic sense versus other kinds of information. For example, a piece of music. A piece of music is a lot of data, sounds, you say, in a particular structure with a particular meaning. Maybe it's a song that I recognize, or the national anthem of my country. Is it true or false? Well, that's the wrong question to ask. It's music. Music is not true or false. But when it comes to data with syntax and semantics about what I had for breakfast this morning, well, that is true or false. And that's what I call a strong sense of semantic information. Information in the ordinary semantic factual sense means that it has to be true. Last example, imagine if I am a doctor, you come to see me, and you ask me about something that you have, and I give you some information. I say, oh, that's a flu. Then you come back and then say, well, doctor, you were wrong. That was not a flu. It was something else. I say, well, you didn't ask for true information. You asked only for information. I mean, you will be really upset. Why? Because normally what we mean by information in the main sense, semantic, factual, is something that is true. It works with the world. So the debate is open. People have been questioning, oh, does information have to be true or not? I think it's what we mean by it in an ordinary sense that makes us decide that, yes, it has to be true. If it isn't, it's called misinformation, disinformation. So it's something else.
Yeah. So would you say that there's sort of an hierarchical organization from data and information up to semantic information, and then even, I don't know if you want to touch on this point, but what we call knowledge, because that's another kind of thing, right?
Indeed. I think there is a progressive inclusion of features. Maybe hierarchical is a good word, maybe not, I don't know. But essentially, it's like starting from the simple data, adding some structure, syntactic data or syntactically structured data, adding meaning, semantically meaningful, syntactically structured data, and you keep going up, as it were, in complexity or refinement. And then if it is true, then you can talk about strong, factually okay, semantic information. What's the difference between that and knowing something? Mm-hmm. Well, the difference is that you have to have some way of explaining, justifying, I prefer to say, accounting for that information. So imagine we get all the way up to Pythagoras' theorem, just to have a super classic. Well, I can have Pythagoras' theorem as the data, the syntax, and the semantics, and it's all true, but I may have no way of proving it. I can't tell you why that is the case. I just know that, if you do this and that, that's what you get. But someone, say a mathematician, will come and say, no, I can tell you that there's this proof. In fact, there are many, many proofs for Pythagoras' theorem. But the mathematician knows I am more like a parrot. I just repeat what I have been given as, say, the statement of Pythagoras' theorem. So the difference between owing or stating some semantic information versus knowing is that the expert can provide more and more justifications, reasons for, accounting of that piece of information that the non-expert, someone who does not know but is merely informed, cannot.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so we have semantic information, and then we have to upgrade it to knowledge in some way, right? So how do we get from one place to the other exactly?
Well, normally what we do is to inquire, ask the classic why question, and put that semantic information into a network of other reasons why what is the case is the case. So if someone tells you, look, there's been a virus, for example, given these days, problem in a city. So how do you know? Well, I just read that on the newspaper. Okay, so you have the information. Why is that the case? You say, I don't know. I just read that on a newspaper. Well, that's not knowledge. That's more like having a piece of information. The medical team will probably know why there is that particular virus in that city, and they will know also what to do about it. So you move from information to knowledge by adding either what we normally call justification, explanation. As I said, I prefer to talk about an account or why that is the case, meaning that you put it into a network of questions and answers, so that if I ask you more questions, you can provide me more answers. Mm-hmm. The expert is someone who knows, is someone to whom you can ask a lot of questions, and it will keep giving you more and more answers. Mm-hmm. Someone who doesn't even have the first answer is merely informed, doesn't have knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so this also connects with science and the scientific method, right? And I mean, how do we know that we really know something about the world itself by applying these methods? So that's another question that philosophy of information inquires about, correct?
Yes, indeed. So science is not just, as people imagine, collecting a lot of information about the world or the universe. Sure. Well, we may have a lot of information about, say, the sun, the solar system, black holes, but that's not yet science. Science tries to explain. It tries to find laws that connect phenomena in overall organizing sort of principles, so that you know why something happens if something else happens, or what would have happened if something else had happened. Now, the trivial example of the billiard balls hitting each other and so on, well, causal explanations, for example, they tell you more than, oh, that's a fact. Well, facts have been around for a long time. Is what you do in terms of making sense and explaining the universe that makes the difference between observing something and doing science about it. We can observe, for example, a lot of what happens in the brain. Now we have plenty of non-invasive methodologies to do that, but we have very little explanation. That's why science is still at an early stage. Neuroscience is still developing, because we don't have for the brain what we might have, for example, in quantum physics for the way in which some particles work. And even there's so much more that we need to explain. We don't quite know. We have the phenomena. We can collect the information, but how we organize that into a meaningful and explainable overall picture of that topic, well, that's the scientific sort of enterprise.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, just before I move on to another specific question, wouldn't you say then that in the philosophy of information, we are also dealing with an area that works at the intersection of different philosophical branches? Because as I'm hearing you talk, I guess that we can say that it has to do also with metaphysics, for example, the metaphysics of information, what is information, and then we can move up to, for example, philosophy of mind and talk about what is knowledge and things like that. So, I mean, it's really a very broad area in philosophy, right?
You're right. If you remember when I said that there are different ways of doing philosophy of information, you can either take a historical view, try to look at bits of philosophy of information from the Greeks onwards. You can look at a very specific branch of philosophy, in the same way as we have, for example, philosophy of logic or philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, as you said. Or, as in my case, you can actually take it as a new way of doing philosophy. So when I do philosophy of information firsthand, not when I'm wearing the hat of one philosopher among many others, saying, look, we have another block here, maybe we can also teach a course on the philosophy of information, like many other courses. But when I do philosophy firsthand, I treat philosophy of information as a way of doing philosophy full stop. To me, and I said this in the past, it is the philosophy of our time for our time. It is what we should be concentrating on today in order to understand what's happening to the world, what's happening to us, what's happening to the digital revolution, and how this affects our way of thinking, therefore our way of doing philosophy. But as I said before, this is a very personal way of doing philosophy of information. It reminds me of some other philosophers in the past who used to do philosophy of language, not just as a branch of philosophy among many others, but as the philosophy to be done at that time. So in the same way as you can interpret philosophy of language as the philosophy of your time, likewise I have the same approach to philosophy of information. To me, I approach metaphysics, epistemology, ethics from an informational perspective. And therefore, my philosophy of information extends to ontology, to philosophy of language, to logic as well, all the way down to the philosophy of mind, personal identity, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if we follow your approach, maybe it is an approach that is not that interested in just looking at one philosophical bucket, but trying to bring together all the different branches that we have nowadays, and also respecting the science that we have and the information or the knowledge that we get from science, right?
I think so. And if you look at great simplified categorization of the history of Western philosophy, it's easy to say that a lot of Greek and medieval philosophy is pretty much concerned mostly with metaphysics. And it's about what the world is like, what it should be like, what you could make of it, and so on, who we are, and so on. Anything else depends on the metaphysics. Then you can tell, again, I'm really providing a huge sketch here, then from, say, Renaissance, but above all from Descartes onwards, metaphysics starts becoming less and less important, and the primary way of doing philosophy is by looking at epistemology. It's really about the theory of knowledge and how knowledge shapes our way of understanding the nature of the world. So your metaphysics will depend on your epistemology, not the other way around. And then you get all the way, again, oversimplifying to end of modernity, beginning of contemporary philosophy, so to speak, especially Husserl, Frege, Russell, Wittgenstein, Heidegger, and it's all about language. So it's not about reality, it's not about knowledge of reality, but it's about the language that shapes your knowledge, that shapes how we perceive reality. And so the primary focus becomes semantics, philosophy of language, hermeneutics, and you can tell that anything else, that depending on your epistemology, your metaphysics, on, shall we say, broadly understood, your philosophy of language. What I'm suggesting, and I'm ashamed of the perspective so broad, so forgive me, but what I'm forgetting is a fourth step, saying after the philosophy of language as the first philosophy, we should really move to the concept of information as more fundamental than either language, knowledge, or reality. It's through information that we understand all the other three before. So putting philosophy of information at the center of, or the foundation for, any other philosophical enterprise. And so that will be a fourth step, as it were, away from metaphysics, epistemology, philosophy of language, hermeneutics, to a philosophy of information as first philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So asking now about the philosophy of mind aspect of the philosophy of information, do you think that nowadays there is still any version of mind-brain dualism that is defensible according to the philosophy of information?
I think that dualism has, well, let me put it this way, has been either misinterpreted or mispresented. Mm-hmm. It will be like, to me, the dualism of mind and brain is a bit like the dualism between two branches of the same tree. Yeah. And if you don't know that it is the same tree, you actually start thinking that branch A and B are sort of independent. They're separate. They're two, and you start wondering how they can possibly coordinate so much all the time. When one flowers, the other flowers. When one is sick, the other one is sick. It looks like magic until you realize that, well, I mean, they belong to the same tree. So whether we look at ourselves, to put it differently, as biological organisms, brains, and so on, or as mental entities, semantic engine, and so on, these are two different levels of abstraction of the same entity. The question is whether one or the other is, or many others indeed, is preferable with respect to the question you are asking. So what's the purpose here? If the purpose is to explain our sort of mental life, then we better talk about mind and semantics and the world of meanings and so on. Talking about brainwaves would not help. But, for example, if we are in a sort of surgical context, talking about mind would be totally useless. Semantics would not be the right place. I would like to know which area of the brain has been affected by that particular, for example, tumor. So once again, it's not like in absolute terms, is it a mind, is it a brain? The question is, really, the point is, why are you asking that question? What for? The purpose determines the level of abstraction at which I'm analyzing the system and gives me a particular model. To me, mind, brain are two models of the same system. So I don't see the dualism as being justified, but I don't see it as unjustified either. It looks to me more like, well, it's a methodological choice, whether we like to concentrate on the brain biological side in this particular context, or the mental, semantic, meaningful, intentional side in another context. And this is not relativism. It's just a matter of making clear what for. Because, as I said, models are comparable depending on how much and how well they fulfill a particular purpose. So it is not true that, oh, then anything goes. No, that question has been asked for a particular purpose. If I know the purpose and I know the question, then I know also which question will require what answer. And to me, brain and mind are two answers fighting for the same question. Unless you tell me the purpose, I don't know which one is right.
Mm-hmm. So nowadays there are different scientists, like for example cognitive scientists and neuroscientists and people who do work in AI that talk about the brain as a computer. Do you agree with that kind of metaphor, and why?
I think that metaphor is sometimes helpful. There are contexts in neuroscience where computational approaches to brain processes are incredibly enlightening in terms of better understanding of what is going on. I think we should also be extremely careful not to take that metaphor too seriously. I mean, a computer and a brain are so much different in terms of what's going on. One is an analog machine, the other one is digital. One is continuous, one is discrete. One works with an internal clock, the other one doesn't. You can keep going in terms of these analogies. So the question becomes, is it helpful or is it not? I think in the past it was interesting to look at the brain from this particular metaphorical angle. Mm-hmm. I have the impression that it has become increasingly constraining as a metaphor, and I'm worried that some people actually take it too seriously. Seriously, in terms of science, the brain is not a computer, and a computer is not a brain. In the same way in which my digestive system is not an input process output mechanism. You can model it that way, but there's only that much you can get out of the metaphor. Today, with AI and the lack of proper language to describe these new forms of agency that are successful and yet totally stupid, the risk of being too much anthropomorphic in our descriptions are too serious to indulge too much in metaphorical language. So I would warn anyone who speaks of the brain as if it were a computer not to use that metaphor too much. You might actually be taken seriously, and there will be a disservice to science.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that it's important for us to not conflate the model, because we can create mathematical models of the brain or computational models of it with the thing itself, let's say, or what it really is or how it works?
Well, absolutely, but that is true throughout our epistemological enterprise. Mm-hmm. When we build models, we abstract some features, meaning that we disregard some, we concentrate on others, we simplify, we normally aggregate data, for example, and so on. So what we get as a result is something that would be preferably described as correct or incorrect with respect to what for. But it's not something that we should take as almost like a picture or a photograph of what we have been discussing. Let me take a very simple example. Suppose we want to have a model of a car. Mm-hmm. I mean, an ordinary car that you drive on a daily basis. How many models of that car, as in description of that car, are there? A boundless number. I mean, you could describe that as a particular model by a particular maker. You could describe it as a particular family car. It could be described in terms of price, in terms of consumption, in terms of age, in terms of emotional value attached to it. Maybe it's your grandfather's car. So, well, where is the limit? There is no limit. The question is, what model is the right model, the correct model for the question you were asking in the first place?
Okay.
Let me give you a completely different example for the philosophers who are listening. Remember the Theseus ship, the one that you change planks and so on? Well, I really find that example at the same time enlightening and entertaining for the following reason. Imagine, is the tax man who is asking the question, is that your ship, the Theseus? And Theseus says, no, I changed all the planks. Like, I don't care. I'm going to get the tax on this ship. You change everything. It's still your own. Is your ownership is the same. Suppose it's a collector asking that question. Is it the same ship? No, I changed all the planks. Sorry. The price has collapsed immediately. It's not the same. I wanted to have the original piece. You change all the planks. It's worthless. Mm-hmm. The joke, I think, is a Polish one, I'm not sure, that says, this is my grandfather's axe. My dad changed the blade, and I changed the handle. Is it the same? Depends on the purpose. Mm-hmm. The building at the corner used to be a hospital, now is a school. Is it the same? Why are you asking that question? To go there is the same. to see what happens inside is completely different. Also, always right. Give me the question. Give me the purpose. Why are you asking the question? Then we have a talk. In other words, just to finish, in a context where there's no level of abstraction that has been set up, anything goes, only messy answers, and we can have conversations for the rest of our lives. We will never reach a particular conclusion, not even about whether we agree or disagree. In other words, there's a stage where philosophy is not even wrong, as they used to say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's get now into the ethics of information, because that's another thing that the philosophy of information cares about, and it has a real impact on our lives, at least some of the questions that we ask there. So in broad terms, what would you say is important about the potential impact that information and communication might have or already have on our modern lives?
I think there's a lot to be said here, but let me try to be short if I can. So a lot of the history of ethics is a history of agents, people who do things. So the normal question we ask in an introduction to ethics is, for example, who should I be? What should I do? Why should I do it? These are typical I questions. I'm the agent, I'm doing something, am I doing the right thing? Am I the right kind of person doing the right thing? And why should I be doing that instead of something else? That's the beginning of typical 101 introduction to ethics. I've been arguing that in recent times, maybe not for the past half a century or so, ethics has been increasingly concerned with the receiver of the action, the patient, so to speak. And it's not just in medical terms, but also, for example, in bioethics, in environmental ethics, in business ethics, in information ethics, as I define it. What happens to not the agent, but the receiver of the action? Now, next step. This can be modeled as sender, message, receiver. Mm-hmm. The message is the action, the sender is the agent, the receiver is the patient. So a lot of discussion has moved from the sending agent to the receiving patient. This is good news. This is the way we should be doing it. More ecological, that's great. Asking what's good for you in terms of my action, not what's good for me in terms of my action, but putting you at the center. Next chapter, chapter 3, so to speak. How can we put each other at the center? Now, the patient, the agent, I'm always both. I'm a sender of messages, but also a receiver of messages. So this distinction, chapter 1 and chapter 2, doesn't quite work. Correct. So what I've been arguing for the past few years is that what we should develop is an ethics not of the sender, good old style, not of the receiver, more recently, but of the relationship between the two. To give you a simple example, it's not the ethics of Juliet and it's not the ethics of Romeo. It's the ethics of their love. It's not Mary and Peter, but it's the ethics of their marriage. It's not this party or that party. It's the ethics of politics. It's not about A or B, but the relationship that builds A and B. At that point, no, not you and me, but our friendship. That's what is at the center. And that's the ethics of. Now that becomes an ethics of relations. And the last point becomes a bit more metaphysical, because it means looking at the agents and the patients as nodes in a network. What matters are the links, because the links makes the nodes. In the past, we have seen ourselves more like mechanisms where you've got lots of things that come together and build more complex entities. I've been arguing again more ontologically that we should be looking at the world as a network, not like a mechanism. And in a network, the nodes are constituted by the relations, the links. So taking care of the links means taking care of the nodes. Last point, for example, in politics, that's the last book I'm writing now, we shouldn't be concentrating only or primarily on the res publica, the public thing, but we should be concentrating on the ratio publica, the rational but also relational way in which we build our society. That's the fabric of society that needs to be taken care of by politics. Then everything else, all the agents and all the patients, emerge healthier or less healthy in terms of what we take care when we take care of the relations.
Right. And these agents and patients you are talking about, you're not only referring to humans, right? You're also including machines, AI systems, and other artificial agents that already exist or are close in the future. Right?
Indeed. I mean, an agent is anything or anyone that can output an action. I mean, it could be a volcano. Okay. We just don't treat a volcano as a moral agent because we know it has no freedom, no intentionality, no ability to change. But it could be a dog. I mean, a dog is already something that we can treat as a moral agent, so much that we can punish a dog, we can educate a dog, we can change the behavior of a dog, and so on. So I have a very inclusive sense of what a moral agent can look like. It could be a robot if it is sufficiently autonomous, interactive, able to change its sort of behavior. It doesn't mean that a dog and a robot are like us, but they can output actions that we declare to be morally good or bad, and therefore they are a source of moral actions. At the other side, at the end of the process, who can be a receiver? I think that the whole universe is on the other side. I mean, a river, as we know in sort of environmental ethics, could be something that could be negatively affected by the wrong moral actions. You can pollute a whole river, destroy a form of life. You can pollute a whole valley. In fact, you can destroy with a nuclear bomb a whole planet. That is morally wrong, shall we say, and it shows that on the other side, the whole universe is part of the receiving entity that my link is affecting. So when I say, look, any entity by default, initially, in an overridable sense, has a right to exist for what it is, all I'm saying is, in a very Neoplatonic way or Spinozian way, say we should be mindful of everything, the whole reality. There's nothing in the universe that is below a threshold such that that thing deserves to be disregarded, deserves disrespect. I don't think there is such thing. Now, of course, there's the problem of evil, but evil, as far as I'm concerned, is a matter of links, not a matter of entities. There is no node that is evil independently of the links that make it so. So having a more sort of Augustinian Platonic idea of evil as non-being, I don't find evil as something that is worth my hate. What is worth my hate, morally speaking, is whatever relations generate the evil.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, and if we talk about artificial agents, then it is particularly relevant from an ethical perspective because we are creating and programming them, right? So, I mean, they wouldn't exist without a purpose, or if they weren't created by us. It's not like a dog or an animal or a tree or whatever. Correct.
Indeed, and so we have higher responsibilities because we are designing these particular nodes in the network called artificial agents, and depending on how we design them, we could design them as sources of good actions or sources of evil actions. But do not make them responsible. Responsibility comes with a mental life, with intentionality, with semantics, with intelligence. These are mechanisms, but they are sufficiently autonomous, interactive, able to change their behavior depending on a feedback mechanism, such that if we design them wrongly, they can generate a lot of evil outcomes, a lot of pain, for example. Well, I mean, if you create a machine that generates a lot of pain, pointlessly, gratuitously, just for the sake of evil outcomes, who is responsible for that? The machine? Really? Oh, but it's autonomous. Well, but I build it that way. I make sure that that would be the future of that machine. Now, of course, there are unexpected consequences. There are mistakes made. Well, at that point, we decrease their responsibility, as we always do, to the point, or maybe zero responsibility on the human side, and we turn off immediately that machine because it's a bad construct, is the wrong artifact to have around. To me, not accountability, but responsibility is always a human business because it requires a mental life, intentionality, and the freedom to be able to change your future for better.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess that there are also other aspects to this question, like, for example, the kind of relationships that we might be able to establish with these beings. I mean, they can even become our companions sometimes, right? So that could fundamentally change also the kinds of relationships that we establish with those beings and with other people. And then there's also the question of if they will anytime in the future be able to become sentient, and so we would have to be a little bit more careful about how we deal with them.
I would like to distinguish these two questions because one is scientific, the other one is science fiction. Mm-hmm. Scientific question is how we interact with artificial agents that are built to make sure that we have some kind of a empathic, emotional involvement. They are built to generate in us that projection. It's a little bit like the old toys, maybe the doll or the plastic soldier. Now, we have a normal tendency to project emotional, intellectual, human characteristics on anything we play with. And even more so if what is in front of us has been built on purpose to trigger that projection. So if I build something that looks cute, may sound as if you were suffering if you don't treat it well, it may issue noises that make us think that is either happy or unhappy, well, the normal reaction from anyone would be to start treating that entity as if were, for example, a little dog or a little puppet or something. It doesn't mean that it is anything more behind the interface in terms of real mental life, emotional, or even biological interactions. So that's one thing. It's a problem with interface. Do we like it? Do we not? Are we going to allow to build these interfaces in such a way that they trick us into thinking that is, for example, a good companion for elderly people who feel alone, and they can stroke this little thing, they can take care of that little thing, and so on. That's one story, and I'm quite careful here that I think that there are limits that we should not disrespect. We should be careful about how much we want to pull this in the direction of making people emotionally dependent on simple artifacts. I would not like to be attached to my dishwasher. I should not be attached to something that is like a dishwasher. It's just that it sounds very happy when it's doing the dishes, okay? Or porous when I put extra soap in it. It's a bit weird. That is in order to maintain the authenticity of a mental life. The other story is when they become sentient. That is Hollywood. And I don't think we should indulge into Hollywood scenarios. I think it's a bad habit of philosophy to work into the what if, when the what if is science fiction. But unless people argue, well, it can be illustrative, it can be a way of generating more ideas. Well, there are more realistic contexts where real problems affect us on a daily basis. So the day some magic sci-fi AI becomes like me, well, it will be like me. So I should treat it like me. It's not a question. It's just tautology.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let me just ask you about one last topic, because I don't want to take much more of your time, Dr. Floridi, and then I might have some follow-ups to it. So we've already talked about the relationship between humans and other artificial beings, but then nowadays, because we have the internet, for example, there are other ways by which our relationships among humans are changing a little bit. So, for example, in your work, you talk about the infosphere and about new selves that we can create online, for example. So, would you like to tell us a little bit about this? And since we are talking about the ethics of information and the philosophy of information, in what ways do you think that the relationships between people you focus on might be changed by these information and communication technologies?
Thank you. Yes, this is a very important question. And if we go back to the analogy of looking at reality as a network, and therefore to the idea that the nodes are constituted by the relations, if you change the nature and the quantity and quality of the relations, you also change in the nodes. Out of this particular analogy, if we look at ourselves as also being constituted by the way in which we interact with anyone else, with the rest of the world, with our past, with our future, what we can afford to develop in terms of information channels and so on, well, you immediately realize that living in a space made of information or infosphere, constantly being now on life, as I said since some time ago, neither online nor offline, but constantly moving in between in a sort of mix and match, partly analog, partly digital, spending more time in connection with people that you've never met, maybe in real life and so on. Well, that is changing all the ways in which the self is being shaped, transformed, can actually make plans about the future. So what I like in all this is the enormous amount of extra plasticity, more opportunities that we are being offered by technologies. For example, I could become someone who is incredibly interested and expert on a Swedish rock band, something that I could have never done in the past because I would have never been able to, say, join their group, listen to their music, maybe participate in those concerts from far away. Maybe I'm from a small village in Italy and so on. So all that is now at our, it's available. It's out there, just a click away. The trouble is that what we are given is also the risk that we are running, because the plasticity is so extended, and because we know that we are, as humans, we're very adaptable, we can be influenced very easily, we are very fragile. Well, the same kind of opportunities are also risks. We could be manipulated, we could be influenced for the wrong reasons, we could be taken for a ride, and politically, socially, in terms of taste, in terms of choices. And so I've highlighted both the opportunities and risks here, because I think that a proper design and proper education and proper socio-political rules could send us in the right direction and say, look, this is an amazing opportunity for humanity. But the wrong kind of rules, the wrong kind of education or lack of education, a lack of critical approach and so on, generates the fake news, the political wrongdoing, the social mistakes, social panic, for example, these days because of the virus, and so on. And I think we should fight the negative malleability that digital technologies provide and endorse and support the good malleability. It means, and I close here, that if you describe an individual as work in progress, like an open text, a book that you are writing yourself as you move along, well, the more opportunities you have to write that book, to make that work in progress, say, a work of art, the better. So affordances, opportunities, great possibilities. The more you nail that to a profile, you're just an interface, all I want from you is either your money, your vote, or your support, then you have the Kantian problem. You're using humans as means, not as ends, and you are transforming a great opportunity into essentially a prison. Well, that is, to me, the risk that we're running these days as we build these technologies literally for future generations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and this will be my last question. Would you say then that it is not technology itself that is malicious, but simply perhaps the ways we deal with it, we apply it in the world, and then what we have to do to properly put the different kinds of technology into practice is to really have some experience with it and learn it, and then educate people about the best ways to use it.
I think that we need to be careful here because philosophy is never neutral.
Okay.
It's always charged with values. The problem is that people stop here and say, okay, of course, yeah, the knife, you can cut the bread or you can kill someone, depends on how you use it. But that's not true either. You need another step. Not only technology is not neutral, technology is always charged, mostly, often double charged, and that's the last step, is double charged in one way or another. So the knife, it is not true that every knife, for example, is double charged, you can kill someone or cut the bread. Because the knife that you get on an airline, for example, which is this small, no blade, no sharp, no nothing, it's just to spread some butter, you cannot kill someone with that. I mean, it would be literally impossible, or shall we say, very, very hard. But a bayonet, which could be a kind of knife, that is meant to kill someone. It's not meant to cut the bread, and it's not meant to spread the butter on the slice of bread. So technology is not neutral, it's charged, is double charged, and is double charged with a bias, with a preference. It's up to us to build the right technology with the right values, and then, when we have it, to use it properly. So, for example, the internet, classic, not big technology, if we want to generalize, it's double charged, good and bad, but mostly for good. I mean, it's more communication, more information, more contacts among people. We can organize ourselves better. We can coordinate. Well, it seems to be largely something for good, but it can be used for bad as well. Yes, absolutely. So it's up to us. Design the right technology and use it properly. That is an entirely 100% human endeavor. The responsibilities are only ours and no one else. Technology has no responsibility. It has values embedded. That's a different story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dr. Floridi, let's end the interview on that note. Just before we go, would you like to mention some places on the internet where it would be easier for people to get in touch with your work?
Absolutely. There are a couple of websites. If you just type Google, search my name and surname, you will find quite a lot of things. There's also a YouTube channel where I hope we will host this video. It contains more than 100 videos, lectures, interviews. So I hope that is quite helpful. And then maybe last, the OUP website where most of my books are available.
Mm-hmm. By the way, earlier in the interview you mentioned that you are writing a new book. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? Give us a teaser or something like that.
So to anyone who wants to read something, I would strongly recommend the following few things. There's a very short book called Information, a Very Short Introduction. It's a tiny book. You can read it in a weekend, and it's meant for the general public. Then there's something a little bit more intellectual, again for the general public, called The Fourth Revolution, How the Infosphere is Changing Human Lives. And I hope it's of interest to the general public. If you're more philosophical, maybe the first half of my most recent book, The Logical Information, tells you about what philosophy should be like today. But the new book that I'm writing is on the politics of information and how the information revolution, the digital revolution, is changing our way of socializing and doing politics, and how we should reconsider and reinvent a little bit politics in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. Do you know when it will be out or not yet?
Strangely enough, the Italian version is coming out. The English version will probably take another year.
Okay, great. So I will be expecting that book because I love the other ones, all of the books that you mentioned. So, and I recommend it to all to my audience and all my followers. So, Dr. Floridi, thank you again for taking the time to come on the show, and it was a real pleasure to everyone.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience, for the wonderful questions. This has been quite a rewarding experience. Many thanks.
Okay, guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. I've got a lot of new supporters of the show recently. That's great. And for the people out there who are watching or coming to my channel for the first time, I've been doing a lot of interviews with academics and intellectuals from a variety of fields. And to keep the channel sustainable, I would really like to ask you to please pay a visit to my Patreon page and to consider making a pledge there, any amount you feel comfortable with. And if you prefer PayPal, there are also links to several monthly subscription systems and also a link for a one-time or several times big donations if you want, whatever you prefer. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like, and hit the subscription button. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons and PayPal supporters, the main ones: Karen Litska, Anne Blanchett, Pererga Larsen, Lau Guerrero, Francis Ford, Hans Fredrik Sunda, Iane Henninen, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, Adam Kessel, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wiesel, David Diaz, Anian Kata, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollesy, Henry Kalanius, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Dr. Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Rutger Voss, Bo Weingart, Rebecca Newberger Goldstein, Dan Demetriou, Robert Windeger, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Zoop, Marco Neves, Max Bailby, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Thomas Trumbull, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Columbus, Jorge Espinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, my producers, Izar Webbe, Rosie, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Llewellyn Osborne, Dr. Ian Gilligan, Sergio Codriano, Luis Caetano, and Matthew Lavender, and also my executive producer, Michel Rugieski. Thank you for all.